I still remember the first time it happened, well, the moment it really sank in that something was off. It was the dead of night, around 2 a.m., and I was manning the drive-thru window at Burger King, like any other late shift grind. The flicker from the fluorescent lights inside barely cut through the thick night air, the parking lot wrapped in shadows and silence, except for the hum of the neon sign buzzing overhead. I'd been doing this job for 2 years, enough to grow used to the quiet hours and the steady stream of strangers passing by, none of them sticking around longer than necessary. That night, a car came up to the speaker. The voice on the other end was just a normal guy ordering large double Whopper with cheese, fries, and a Coke. Nothing unusual there. But when it came time to pay, he barely cracked his window. Just enough to slide his card through the slot. His windows were so heavily tinted, I couldn't catch even a glimpse of his face. After the beep of payment approval, I slid the receipt over and waited for him to drive around to the pickup window. But he never did. Instead, the car peeled off into the darkness before I could even call the order out. I stood there, awkward and confused, holding the bag of food. I waited, half expecting him to circle back. Maybe he forgot something or changed his mind. After a few minutes, I shrugged it off and stuck the meal in the warmer. Later, I ended up eating it myself because, really, what else was I supposed to do? People do weird things sometimes. Then, it happened again a week later. Same exact order, same quiet payment, same tinted windows, and again, the car sped off before picking up the food. At that point, I thought maybe it was just some prank or someone testing the system. It didn't occur to me just how wrong that assumption was. By the third time, the pattern was impossible to ignore. The nights between visits were always irregular but never more than a few days apart, and the order never changed. I was working alone when the voice came through the speaker again, smooth and calm but strangely familiar. I had started to half expect it, almost looking forward to the free meal. I allowed myself a small smile, thinking maybe this ghostly customer was just a generous stranger or someone who liked to break the monotony of these long shifts by sending a free dinner my way. But then, that night, everything twisted. When he spoke, it wasn't the bland order that caught me off guard. It was what he said after. The words crawled out through the speaker and wrapped around my spine like ice water. "I hope you've been enjoying those Whoppers, Mr. Hurley." My heart stopped. My last name, Hurley. I don't wear a name tag, and it isn't posted anywhere in the restaurant. No one but my managers knew it, and the customers never used it. There was no way anyone should have known. I froze, the words spinning through my head, refusing to connect into sense. I tried to speak, fingers trembling over the mic. "Who is this? How do you know my name? What do you want?" My voice cracked, repeating my questions again and again into the void, desperate for a reply that never came. The engine revved sharply, and like every other time, the car vanished into the night, leaving nothing but cold air and a sick sense of dread in its wake. The rest of my shift was a blur. I was rattled, nerves frayed to a cracking point, the weight of the unknown pressing down on me like a stone. Then the nightmare followed me home. I found a note pinned to my doorstep, scrawled in jagged handwriting. "I know what you did. You have 3 days." My hand trembled violently as I held it, the words tightening an invisible noose around my throat. I scanned my memory, desperate to find any secret, any wrong I'd committed. But my life was simple, mundane even. A 24-year-old night owl flipping burgers, playing video games when I got time. No enemies, no dark past, nothing. I barely slept that night, sitting stiff on my couch with every light in the house blazing. My mind raced over every possibility, every horror movie scenario flashing through my brain. But the clock ticked away, and nothing else happened. Until the next night back at work. That night, the guy showed up again at the speaker, but he was different this time. No order, no casual chatter. Instead, he asked me to write something down, then slid a folded piece of paper through the slot before I could even process what was happening. It was an address in a rundown part of town I didn't recognize. And alongside it was a demand. 2 days to deliver $10. I nearly laughed through my mounting terror. Me? Pay 10 grand to some creepy late-night figure who buys me burgers? The absurdity of it jangled against the dread curling in my gut. He was deadly serious. The way his voice cut through the speaker left no room for. When the engine roared and disappeared, I was left in the flickering glow of the empty lot, wondering how badly my life had just spiraled into something unrecognizable. I didn't call the police. Not then. Part of me thought it was some elaborate joke, or maybe a scam by someone who knew I worked nights and figured they could mess with me. Ignoring it felt like the only chance I had to hold on to normality, but normal wasn't coming back. 3 nights later, I was sitting quietly, letting the exhaustion from my shift wash over me on the couch, when a sudden crash shattered the silent darkness. Glass exploded into shards across the floor, and instinct seized me. I hit the ground hard, heart hammering against my ribs, certain someone was out to get me. When I finally dared to rise and check, the window was broken, jagged fractures spiderwebbing through the glass. Outside, only the quiet night remained, the shadow of whoever threw the rock already swallowed by the void. That was the moment I called the police, spilling the entire story, the address, the threats, the terrifying mystery wrapped around my nights. They promised patrols and caution, but there was no footage, no proof beyond my frightened words. Their reassurances felt thin, fragile. Now, 3 days have passed since then. I've called in sick for the last few shifts just to avoid the drive-thru window, but the fear clings to me like a second skin. I can't move. I can't stop working, not without rent piling up, and the worst part is knowing this guy knows exactly where I live. I'm stuck in this trap, a nightmare built from quiet threats and dark unknowns, left wondering how a simple Burger King employee became the target of something so cold and menacing. Tracking that credit card might be a lead, but for now, I wait, watching every shadow, dreading every knock, hoping desperately the stranger's game won't spiral even further into darkness. I was about to shut down for the night, just past 1:30 a.m., on a quiet Saturday, the kind of late hour where fatigue sets into your bones and every quiet street looks empty and a little too still. I'd been driving for hours, ferrying drunk college kids from downtown bars to their far-flung homes on the outskirts of the city, chasing surge pricing like a lifeline. The Uber app was blinking, the last few rides draining my patience and my gas tank. I had one final request pop up, a pickup downtown, but a drop-off way out past the suburbs, almost into nowhere. Normally, I'd pass it was too far, too isolated, but the promised fare was tempting enough to make me say yes. She was just a girl, normal enough, tired and yawning, rubbing her eyes as she climbed in. We didn't talk much during the drive. 40 minutes later, I dropped her off on a street that was all dark and empty around it. I watched her walk into her house, the faint glow of porch light, the only sign of life for miles. And then I was alone again, middle of nowhere, facing a long, lonely drive back to town. I flipped the car around and hit the road. No more than 10 minutes in, headlights caught my eye. A car stopped dead in the center lane, hazards flashing like a warning beacon. 2 figures stood in front of it, waving their arms desperately. My heart thudded in that way when something feels wrong but you can't stop yourself. I wanted to keep driving, to pretend I hadn't seen them, but something pushed me to pull over 20 feet away and crack my window just enough to hear. They were a couple, middle-aged, but their anxious energy was unsettling. The woman spoke fast, her voice shaky yet rehearsed, like she'd delivered this warning before. She told me a bridge ahead had collapsed earlier today, nearly swallowing their car whole. She gestured down. It started with a sound that should not have been possible inside a locked warehouse. A slow, heavy scrape, like metal teeth being dragged across concrete in the dark. I remember freezing at the security desk with one hand still on the mouse, my eyes locked on a black and white camera feed that showed nothing at all, and yet somehow made me feel like something was standing just outside the frame, waiting for me to look away. That was a few winters ago, when I was 26 and working overnight security at a commercial warehouse complex on the edge of a small industrial city. I'd been on the job for about 8 months by then, long enough to know the place had its rhythms, long enough to stop jumping at every little noise, but not long enough to feel truly comfortable there. The shift ran from 11:00 p.m. to 7:00 a.m., and most nights were almost embarrassingly dull. I'd clock in, do a walk around the exterior, check the bay doors, make sure the fences weren't cut, then settle into the little security office with its stale coffee smell and rows of glowing monitors. After that, my life became a routine of hourly patrols and camera checks, broken up by silence so deep it seemed to press against the walls. There was a supervisor I could call if anything serious happened, but in practice it was just me, the cameras, and a lot of empty concrete. The warehouse complex sat in an industrial district that felt abandoned even when it wasn't. During the day, trucks came and went, forklifts beeped somewhere inside, and workers in reflective vests moved around with purpose. At night, though, the whole place turned into a dead zone of chain-link fencing, sodium lights, and long shadows. The buildings held mostly industrial equipment and bulk supply materials, the kind of stock that was expensive enough to need security, but not the kind of thing thieves usually risked much for. That made the job feel safe in a way that was almost lazy. Most nights I'd finish my rounds, sit down, and count the hours until dawn. The night everything went wrong began so normally that I still think about that part the most. It was cold enough for snow, though the flakes were light and lazy, drifting through the floodlights like ash. The air bit at my face during my first patrol, and my boots crunched softly over a thin white layer, gathering around the loading docks. Everything checked out. The doors were sealed, the fence line was intact, and the locks were all in place. I went back inside, stamped the cold from my feet, and tried to settle into the usual numbness of the shift. Around 1:30 a.m., one of the loading dock cameras triggered a motion alert. That wasn't unusual. The system was overly sensitive, and if the wind kicked up just right, or a bird or stray animal passed through the floodlights, the sensor could trip. I pulled up the camera feed without much concern, expecting the usual blank dock and the occasional flutter of snow. That was exactly what I saw. An empty loading bay, pale snow moving sideways in the light, the concrete shining wet and gray. Nothing human, nothing alive. Then the alert came again 10 minutes later. I checked the same feed. Nothing. Then again, and again. At first I thought the camera was glitching, or maybe some loose metal panel was shifting in the wind just outside the frame. But what began to bother me was the pattern. Every time the alert fired, it came from the same camera. Every time I pulled it up, there was nothing obvious in view, and yet I kept getting the strangest impression that something was moving just beyond where the lens could see. Not in the center of the frame, never in the center, always near the edge, always just out of sight, like a hand slipping away behind a wall the moment I turned my head. By 2:30, I'd gotten 6 or 7 alerts from that same dock camera. No other motion sensors were going off, no doors opening, no alarms. Just that one camera, over and over, like whatever was there knew exactly where to stand to keep teasing me. I tried to talk myself out of it. Snow, wind, bad sensor, old equipment. I kept repeating those explanations because the alternative was too stupid to think about. But the feeling inside me had already shifted from annoyance to unease, and once that happens, it's hard to climb back. At 3:00 a.m., I finally took my flashlight and went outside to check the dock in person. The snow had almost stopped by then, leaving the world outside crisp and still. The entire complex felt abandoned, as if the rest of the city had gone under and I'd somehow been left behind. The floodlights buzzed faintly overhead. My own footsteps sounded too loud. I walked the perimeter of the loading area slowly, sweeping the beam of my flashlight across the concrete, the roll-up doors, the pallets stacked under tarps, the corners where shadows pooled thickest. Nothing. All the bay doors were shut and locked. The chain-link fence was intact. No tire tracks, no broken latch, no footprints other than mine, and even those looked lonely and uncertain in the snow. I stood there for a moment longer than I should have, staring into the silent dark beyond the lights, feeling a ridiculous urge to apologize to nobody. Then I went back inside. For about 20 minutes, things stayed still enough to make me think the whole episode had burned itself out. Then I heard the scraping. It came from inside the warehouse. Not outside. Not near the dock. Inside, deep in the building, somewhere past rows and rows of shelving and pallets and equipment packed into the dark. The sound was metallic and ugly, the sort of noise that makes your teeth hurt because it suggests weight, friction, and effort. Something big was being dragged over concrete floor, slow and deliberate, as if whoever or whatever was doing it wanted me to hear every inch. I snapped to the interior cameras. All 6 feeds showed empty aisles, long corridors of shelving, forklift lanes, yellow floor markings, dim industrial lighting making everything look washed out and ghostly. No movement, no person, no shadow crossing the frame. That was when the fear really started to get under my skin. Up until then, I'd been uneasy. After that sound, I felt hunted. It's hard to explain the difference unless you felt it. It wasn't just that something was wrong. It was the sudden, sick certainty that I wasn't alone in a place that was supposed to be empty, and that whatever was there understood exactly how to keep itself hidden from me. I remember glancing at the office door, absurdly aware of how thin it seemed. I remember listening for my own breathing because even that started sounding too loud. I still tried to rationalize it. Buildings settle, air pressure changes. A loose pallet jack, something against a wall, anything but the obvious answer. Then, about an hour later, I heard it again. This time the scrape was louder, followed by a sharp metallic crash so sudden it made me flinch hard enough to knock my chair back. It sounded like something had slammed into one of the interior doors. Not bumped, not brushed, struck. I went back to the monitors, my hands colder now, and cycled through the feeds again. Camera 1, empty aisle. Camera 2, empty aisle. Camera 3, empty aisle. Camera 3, empty aisle. Camera 3, empty aisle. Camera 3, empty aisle. Camera 3. Camera 6 went black. For about 3 seconds, the screen filled with static. A harsh, grainy hiss crawled across the monitor, and I felt my stomach knot so hard it almost hurt. Then the image returned. Only something was wrong. The view had shifted slightly to the left, maybe a few degrees, as if someone had nudged the camera mount or physically turned it just enough to change what it was watching. The aisle that had been centered before was no longer centered. More of the shelf edge showed on one side now. Less open floor. A subtle change, but unmistakable. That was the moment my brain stopped offering excuses. If the camera had been moved, then something in that building had gotten close enough to touch it. I grabbed my radio and flashlight, and after a second of standing there trying to convince myself not to go, I headed into the warehouse. I wish I could say I did it because I was brave. I didn't. I did it because I was more afraid of staying in the office and listening to the noises than I was of walking into them. Sometimes fear pushes you forward just as hard as courage does. The warehouse was enormous, around 80,000 square feet if I had to guess. All of it divided into long aisles of industrial shelving stacked with crates, wrapped pallets, boxed equipment, and bulk supplies sealed in plastic. In the daytime, the place looked functional and busy, with forklifts buzzing through the lanes and workers calling to each other over the clatter of loading. At night, the overhead lights were dimmed to save power, and the entire interior sank into a jaundiced half-light that turned every object into a suggestion rather than a certainty. The aisles stretched on in rows that seemed to repeat forever. Shadows filled the high spaces above the shelving. Every sound I made echoed back in small, distorted pieces. I moved slowly, sweeping my flashlight ahead of me, trying to keep my breathing steady. Halfway down the main aisle, I heard footsteps. They came from my left, somewhere 2 or 3 aisles over. Distinct footsteps. Not a clank, not a drag, not the random settling of the building. A person walking, measured, soft but clear enough to make my skin go tight. I stopped instantly. The footsteps stopped too. That made the silence worse. I stood there in the dim warehouse light with my flashlight shaking in my hand, listening so hard it felt like my ears were straining. I could hear the faint buzz of the lights, the tiny hum of electrical fixtures. Somewhere far off, a pipe ticked once as it cooled, but nothing else. No movement, no breathing, no cough, no shuffle of clothing, just the crushing stillness of a place too big to defend and too empty to feel safe in. I have never hated silence as much as I did in that moment. Seconds passed. Then more. It felt like time had stopped behaving normally. Every instinct in me was screaming to turn around and run, but another part of me was terrified that if I moved too fast, I'd give away my position to whatever was hiding nearby. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. In a voice that sounded firmer than I felt, I called out that security was on site and told whoever was there to come out and make things easier. I tried to sound like I had control. I tried to sound like a man who expected a reasonable response. No answer came back. So I kept going. The rest of that patrol was the longest walk of my life. Every aisle I checked felt like I was approaching a bad memory I hadn't lived yet. I kept expecting someone to step out from between the shelves, or for a hand to reach down from a catwalk overhead, or for a shape to appear in the far end of the aisle where the light thinned into darkness. I was ready for a confrontation, and that was almost a comfort, because at least a confrontation would have made the situation understandable. But there was no one. I searched the entire route, the loading sections, the storage rows, the interior doors, the corners where pallets were stacked high enough to hide a person. Nothing. No figure, no footprints, no sign of forced entry, no sign of where those footsteps had gone. And somehow that was even worse, because if I hadn't imagined it, then whoever had been in there knew how to disappear. They knew the building. They knew the cameras. They knew how to move without being caught. The certainty of that sat on my chest like a stone. I finished the patrol, but I don't think I was really present for the last part of it. My mind kept looping the same questions. How did they get in? Where were they now? Were they still there, watching me from just beyond the edge of the light? I didn't see or hear anything else for the rest of the shift, but the quiet didn't feel peaceful. It felt controlled. By then, I was embarrassed too, which was almost worse than the fear. My job was simple: patrol, observe, report. I wasn't dealing with violent criminals or armed intruders every night. I was basically paid to walk around an empty building and sit in a chair. Yet I'd managed to let one impossible night shake me to pieces. When 7 o'clock finally arrived, I wanted nothing more than to get out of that place and into daylight. I told my supervisor everything when he came in. The alerts, the scraping, the footsteps, the camera feed changing. He listened, but I could tell from his face that he was already filing my story away under stress, nerves, or overreaction. Maintenance was called and did a full inspection of the warehouse. The doors, the cameras, the access points, the perimeter, all of it. They checked for signs of entry. They checked for tampering. They checked the sensor that had gone off. Nothing. No broken lock. No damaged fence. No loose panel. No footprints leading anywhere useful. No explanation for the blacked-out camera. No answer for the sound in the building. No evidence that anyone had been inside. Even after everything had been looked at twice, then 3 times, nobody could figure out how that person or thing had gotten in, or where it had gone. And I could feel, very clearly, that no one fully believed me. I don't blame them. If I hadn't lived it, I'm not sure I would have believed it either. But I know what I heard. I know what the cameras did. I know that something moved through that warehouse in the middle of the night. Something that knew how to stay just out of sight until it decided to make itself known. That winter night is still one of the strangest and most frightening things that has ever happened to me. And what bothers me most isn't that it happened. It's that I still don't know whether whatever was in there. The memory still claws at me in the dead of night, twisting my stomach into knots years after it happened. Until now, I've only ever spoken about it with the police and a few close family members. Tonight is the first time I'm summoning the courage to lay it all bare. A few years back, during my gap year between high school and college, I landed a night job at a 24-hour gym tucked away in a rough neighborhood. The gym ran on key cards, so only a handful of employees were on shift at any time, usually just 1 or 2 people. It was mostly self-managed, a ghost operation where people swiped in, worked out, and went home. Everything was monitored digitally: doors, equipment usage, everything. My job was simple: mostly sit in the dim, cramped office, eyes glued to the security feed, occasionally pacing the silent halls or chatting with the sparse clientele. One night, I was working a marathon shift, 8 p.m. until 6 a.m., long and dreary, with hours of nothing but the drone of machines and the hum of the lights overhead. Around 2 a.m., after making my usual rounds and finishing the paperwork, I was ready to slack off and just watch the cameras. The gym was nearly deserted, which was normal for those hours, save for a couple of regular night owls I vaguely recognized. Then, out of nowhere, I noticed him, a man on a treadmill in the far, shadowed corner of the gym, a place I barely ever glanced at because it's usually empty. At first, nothing about him was extraordinary. But then I caught the speed, 9 miles per hour, not a casual jog, but a full-out sprint, for 15 minutes straight. Barefoot, his clothes were ragged and filthy, hanging loosely on a frame that looked too thin to hold itself up. His hair was a tangled mess, matted and wild, and his face, a frozen mask, didn't twitch, blink, or register any emotion. His eyes stared straight ahead, emptily, unblinking, like he was hypnotized or trapped in another plane. I felt a chill settle low in my